Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. This is an old brace, and I know it's an old joke, but brace yourselves, we're gonna have some fun today. It's normally at this point I say brace yourselves, and honestly we are going to be working a lot with the brace today, but I wanted to do a quick talk through. This is an old brace with a wooden body, and it's got a brass head, and it's got a few brass pieces here, but the body is wood. And these work great other than you have these weak points here and they often broke. This is a brace from Sheffield, and it is absolutely beautiful. And it's got these brass pieces, but it still has wood here. And so it looks like a wooden brace, but it's brass all the way through. And so you have a metal component from the chuck all the way back here to the handle at the back. Really kind of cool. And I'm going to be doing some more videos going into more detail on this. But I want to take this one and take it apart and see what makes it tick, how is it built, and do a few cleanups on it because it's a bit loose, and I want to do a little bit more cleanup on this to make it nice. So let's take a look at what's inside.
I love doing tool restorations, and particularly this one because you never quite know what you're going to find inside, and it's really interesting to me to find out how did they figure out how to do this in the past, and particularly in this one, seeing the evolution of how it changed over time and how they changed different things to make it more and more functional, but still maintaining that wood feel is rather kind of interesting. You can see how there's these two inlays that fit in here, and there is a steel rod that goes through the handle from one side to the other, and it's been peened over, but that peening has been worked loose over time, so we're going to have to work on fixing that. And yeah, you can see on both ends, it's not quite what it needs to be. There's a little notch in here that would have caught into a notch inside there. And so I was thinking about taking this apart as well, but then I decided that I'm actually going to leave it alone because it's riveted in there and I don't want to be messing that up anymore. It's functional, everything works in there, so let's leave it the way it is and continue on. But you can see how this would pop in there and that little tooth would then grab it so it can't pull out. Now on the other end, we've got this cap that needs to come off. And so there's these two tiny little holes and I clean those out with a pick and I'm thinking, oh no, this is going to be hard to get out. No, actually I just put the pick in there and you can turn the nut. Now these are tiny threads that are actually threaded into the wood of this rosewood knob, and it is amazing. Then down inside there's a split nut. And so great, I've got a split nut driver, but I couldn't get it to come loose. I was putting a lot of force into it, and then I said, wait a second. It might be left-hand thread. And so after cranking it down, I thought, well, let's go the other way. And sure enough, yeah, it's left-hand thread. So we pull out the nut on there. Really kind of cool. But then we realized there's another nut underneath. And so I started cranking down on this one. And this one was not budging. And I'm making sure I'm turning it left, just like I did the one above it. But then come to find out, the one below is actually right-hand thread. So there's two nuts. The one on top is left-hand thread. The one on the bottom is right-hand thread. And it was absolutely flabbergasting to me to see how this went together. And the stud that comes up through it is larger on the bottom, and just a really cool little piece. And I love the ingenuity of things like this. And so once I got it loose, then it just came right out. And they're actually pretty easy. So you can see this head comes out. And then I wanted to take this stud off of the body. And you can see here the right-hand thread and left-hand thread on top. Really kind of ingenuitive. Really cool. But unfortunately, I could not get this to come out of the rosewood. And I don't know how it went in there. I tried all sorts of different things, and it just would not come out. And so I'm assuming it is pinned through there, and I can't find the pin in the rosewood. But on the other end, we can take this brass out of the knob, and I needed to put a little bit more work into it. And this, again, is also threaded into the rosewood. So they cut these tiny little threads into the rosewood, and you can see them in here. Really, really cool. So I went in with a pick and cleaned out some junk that was in there. I want to fix this knob on the end. It's got a crack in it, and I want to make that clean up. And I also want to make sure that the handle is nice and tight. So I'm going to start by putting some oil on here and making sure that it spins nicely and freely. This is usually the only problem with most braces, is that you just need to put a little bit of oil in there and work it down in, and it works great. But in this case, the two ends are a little bit loose. And a 1, 2, 3 block fits perfectly inside this. So they're intended to have a 1-inch slot in there. And I use that as the anvil and then take a punch and punch out the other end. And I can actually tighten up that rod running through the middle. Now for this knob, I want to fill this crack, but unfortunately I don't have any ivory. Yes, this was actually originally filled with some ivory, and so I'm going to create some epoxy with an ivory color, and it came out really nicely. I used some white, a little bit of gold, mixed it together, and then work this into the crack. Unfortunately, this crack went farther down than I had expected, and it started leaking out into the inside. So it actually took a bit of work to keep it from leaking out. Which you'll see that here in a minute. But it was one of those things I just had to be very, very careful with it. So I'm just kind of eyeballing, seeing, does this look about right? Does this look about right? And then yes, I really like the in color of this. It's not perfect match, but it's really close. So I'm going to start by working that in, and then you can come back and clean it off and see, oh yeah, this is going to look out really well. And I thought this is going to be great. I'll put some tape on it, and that'll hold it up against the surface, and I'll get a nice clean finish. I can come and polish it off. But it was a deeper crack than I thought, and it started working down in. Now, before I went any farther, I wanted to fill the rest of the crack in the rosewood, and so I made up an epoxy to fit that. And this one is going to be a bigger one. I knew this was going to be a problem, so I'm using the brush to kind of work it down in there and stick it down in, and I want to let it soak in as much as it can up to the ivory I put in before. But the threads inside actually ran into those, and it was dripping down in, and so I had it to put a little bit in there and then let it sit, and then come back through and put a little bit more, and let it sit, and come back and put a little bit more in there. And you can see how it got sloppy on the top because I had to put several coats in there. Otherwise it was just dripping out inside. And so the idea is you put one or two in there to fill the cracks, clog it all up, and then you can just put a little bit more in there. So it wasn't quite as clean a finish as I wanted because some of the ivory bled out into the long crack, and I had to come back and then polish it off more than I wanted. But with this nice clean files, it cleaned up pretty well. So I actually scuffed up the whole surface and then hit it with some sandpaper. And the sandpaper is there to let me know where do I actually need to come back and clean it up with the file a little bit more. The sandpaper doesn't make it smooth, it just comes in and shows me where are the high spots. A little bit of scraper for some of the spots to work things in, and I'm really not trying to take a lot off. I'm just trying to bring the epoxy down to surface and hopefully smooth it out a little bit. And I want to take this cap back out so you can put a couple things into the pegs, turn them out, and we want to see what does the inside look like. I want to make sure I didn't get epoxy anywhere it wasn't supposed to be, and I still need to be able to attach this down. So let's work on the rest of the body, and I need to clean off all of the gunk and oil and things, and come to find out this is actually tapered. So it tapers and tightens down on there a little ways, but I was having a problem with it sliding down. It wasn't going and seating all the way down to the bottom, and then I realized, wait a second, oh, there's a washer. And I apparently had lost that washer. I found it, but it took me a good 15 minutes of trying to figure out why won't the knob seat all the way down and spin. And yes, that's how it's supposed to work. So we're going to put this down on here, and then we can put the nuts to tighten it back down in, and that's how it goes. But before we do that, I actually want to do some work on the rest of this body and clean up. The rosewood body has some residue from the corrosion between the steel screws and the brass body, and so you can get that the corrosion that goes between them. And yeah, I wanted to clean some of that off of the rosewood. I didn't want to hurt what you actually see, but I wanted to get a nice clean surface between the rosewood and the brass body. All of the screws were heavily rusted, and so I want to clean out the heads and smooth them down a little bit. I'm not making them really shiny. I just want to keep that original patina, but then we can kind of put it all back together, and you can see I'm trying to keep this looking as original as possible without having to do a huge amount on it. But I want to make it functional. I want this tool to work. So we can put these screws in and make sure you don't crank them down. You want to strip out the threads in the rosewood. And each one of these I'm going to come back through and clean them up and sand them and smooth them and make them nice. Now there's these two nuts that go in the end, and the one that's in the bottom is hard to reach because it is a split nut. And so I can actually put two screwdrivers in there and twist them back in, and then I can do a slight tap to drive it down in and lock it in a little bit better. Thankfully, the one on the top I can use with a normal split nut screwdriver, and that one is the left-hand thread. Kind of crazy. So for the final cap, I can put 2 pins into the brass and turn it down on. There were a few spots where the brass was actually bent up and rising against the wood and felt bad in the hand, so I cleaned those up a little bit. And then we can go back through, oil it, and take the thing for a test drive. And lo and behold, it's rather boring. I had to use that at some point. But yes, I really like how this came out. It was a fun project, and it was fascinating to learn how they put these together, and just a lot of interesting history. And that's one of the things I love about tool restoration. It is a lot of fun.
So there you have it. This is a brace that just wasn't quite working and sloppy, and I wanted to tighten it up. I really love these old brass braces, and there are wooden ones, and someday I want to actually do a video making a solid wooden brace. They are kind of interesting, though they are rather delicate because you have thin grain here. The brass fixed that so that basically it's the brass connecting all the way down, which was the predecessor to, oh, let's just make it steel all the way down. And this is very functional, but this is very beautiful. And the reason why these tend to cost so much is that the infill was hard to make, and it took a lot of time to make this, but when you're done, you have a tool that kind of inspires you. And I really didn't want to completely restore this. I just wanted to fix the functionality and make the handle tight again, as well as remove some of the crack work up here. And I really like how it came out. Nice, clean, but still shows its age and its wear, and it's, yeah, happy. So I hope you like this. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, snide remarks, throw those down in the comments down below. I do read through all of them, and even the snide remarks help out because the algorithm here is all powerful. So if you hit any of the buttons down there, like, comment, share, and subscribe, or just go down below and say, comment down below, thank you very much. It means a lot. But if you really want to be amazing, wonderful, beautiful, benevolent even, think about joining these people over here. Those are some of the patrons on Patreon. And between patrons and members, people who click that join button down there, thank you. You guys are the ones that keep us going. You pay for everything that happens, and thank you for that. If you'd like to find out more, then think about becoming a patron member. You know what to do. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. It's a little known fact, but this is actually considered to be a blessing. Itself, it's not holy, but it does make a lot of holy things.